at the same time, the kind of pressure that has been mentioned by Vikram and Subham about the tapering off and the scarcity of capital, and also the fact that it is not going to be that easy for us to get easy investment and so on, forces whoever is going to be in charge in Jakarta first to try to deal with our homework, the infrastructure bottlenecks, the regulatory confusions, the corruption issues, but at the same time to try to make Indonesia attractive, and within ASEAN, given the fact that we are an ASEAN economic community also, to try to deepen cooperation within ASEAN. After all, the potential that ASEAN has is 600 million people. It's not small. So if it's going to be much more difficult for us to go out, that is the reason why we go to ASEAN. And this is also why ASEAN, in fact, has only developed after adversity. When everything in the outside was working well, when there was no distress within ASEAN, ASEAN tends to take things easy, to be very unwilling to make fundamental structural changes. But when forces come from outside to make ASEAN change, and also forces come from inside to make ASEAN change, I think ASEAN will be able to do it. So in this case, sometimes this adverse external environment hopefully will help to push ASEAN also, as well as Indonesia, to speed up our reform.
To three different panelists, and then we can, I guess, at that point, open it up to the audience. The first question which I'd like to ask is to Sebastian Leonard, who made a very strong point about ASEAN has a lot of debate with respect to social and cultural issues. It's got these three very important pillars. And on last count, I think there was something like, ASEAN held something like 1,400 meetings, which is absolutely remarkable. 1,400 meetings in 1 year. But here we have an organization which has 260 staff, which has a budget of $15 million, which is very, very small, for a region of 600 million people. How can an organization which is so small, commanding such a large mandate, and yet with such a small budget and with such few people, do justice to any of these issues? And what do you see in terms of leadership from within the region to try and strengthen the ASEAN Secretariat so that it can actually shoulder many of these burdens? So that's the first question to you, Sebastian. The second question that I want to ask is actually to Doug Paul. In his description of the issues in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, Doug, I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more on the latest air defense identification zone initiative of the Chinese in the East China Sea area, and what is the likelihood of that expanding to the South China Sea, and what are the implications for Southeast Asia? Because if there were to be an air defense identification zone in the South China Sea, would that impede normal commercial air and sea traffic on which Southeast Asia depends so greatly? And actually the last question is to Ibu Devi. I want to come back to Ibu. There is a view that is held that Indonesia is now, in a sense, almost outgrowing ASEAN. Indonesia is in the G20. It is now becoming an important global force in global climate change talks. It is becoming an important force in global trade talks, as was witnessed in Bali recently. And that, given the fact that it is such a dominant member of ASEAN, it is actually looking beyond ASEAN as a way to leverage its capabilities in the foreign policy area. And I think, is there a possibility that other ASEAN members are concerned that Indonesia may in fact be going around ASEAN or going beyond ASEAN and not paying as much attention to strengthening ASEAN so that ASEAN can play its traditional role vis-a-vis all the other members of the region? So let's go to you, Sebastian, first and get your response to the question that I raised.
Thank you, Vikram. In the ASEAN circles, the question will be whether the Secretary General will be given a little bit going forward. How will it be able to address some of the more complex issues that will be raised as a consequence of the three pillars being instituted. I think this will bring challenges that at this moment we can't comprehend, and it needs to be addressed before long. The staff strength and the institutional depth within ASEAN is definitely not significant enough to take it to the next stage. As I said in my remarks, I think ASEAN will do its best to meet the 2015 ideal of achieving an economic community, but it needs essentially to refocus and set the agenda again for another 10-year program in order to effectively become a fully fledged economic community in the real sense of the word. So you raised a very important question. It's something that we've all pondered over the course of the last few years, ever since ASEAN decided to expand its mandate and develop these three pillars. The key will be whether we will see resources forthcoming from the member states to really deepen and strengthen the Secretariat to do the sort of things that it needs to do to move the ASEAN agenda forward.
Doug?
Well, the question is about the Defense Identification Zone on November 23rd. And the international reaction was very sharp. Make the usual sorts of advance noises that it was about to do the action it took, but that it also made the announcement in terms that sounded rather frightening about identifying every vessel that would fly through the air contiguous to China's coast, all the way out to 170 or so kilometers from the Japanese coast. In practice, China has ended up being more reassuring to international navigators. The civil airlines have been generally declaring their routes, even if they're not going into China, and military flights have not declared their routes, and China has not been forcefully challenging those military flights in that air defense identification zone. So they're behaving like most of the other countries do when they have such ADIZs. The problem is that in Southeast Asia, we will certainly see an ADIZ declared at some point in the future. When asked about this, the spokesperson for the Defense Ministry in China said, it's coming without any details about dates. And there are two big unknown factors here. The first is, when will China have the infrastructure, the radars, the air bases, the dedicated aircraft to be able to identify aircraft they want to inspect that might be in a future ADIZ in the South China Sea. Infrastructure will probably take them a few more years to establish. The second thing is, what will be the margins? What will be the definition of that ADIZ? China is unwilling to declare what its real territorial claims in the South China Sea are, because if it doesn't politically maintain maximal claims, they come under pressure from nationalist elements within China that they're giving away sovereign territory to China's neighbors. And just over the weekend, we had an incident where China conducted an exercise on the so-called James Shoal, which is a slightly submerged shoal just off Malaysia. So China's claims are obviously impinging on the claims of Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And China is unwilling to state whether these claims are based on the law of the sea, which has a fairly well-defined terminology for claims that would give China a very substantial, if exercised legally, would give China a very substantial claim to the South China Sea, but not to all of the South China Sea. Instead, China continues to keep alive the prospect of the 9-dash line, which has no status in international law, as the basis for their claims in the region. If the ADIZ in the future were to be based on the 9-dash line, we would have nothing but trouble in the region. If it's based on legal claims and operated in the way the East China Sea, ADIZ, is operating, it should be no impediment whatsoever to normal military and civilian air traffic. China has to make a decision how it's going to handle this. It's not easy for China because nationalist forces are at work there, as they are in Tokyo and elsewhere. I guess my final comment would be, it's the nationalism that really worries me in this part of the world, because leaderships in these countries have not been able to get that channeled in ways that can be protected from erupting into violence down the road. Everybody says they're against violence, but the nationalism that feeds future conflict is nonetheless continuing to build pressure inside each of the systems.
Thank you, Dr. Ibu Devi.
Thank you, Vikram. Whether Indonesia has outgrown ASEAN, is going to be more globalist, or whether it's still going to prioritize ASEAN. Before the foundation of ASEAN, Indonesia was always very globalist. Under President Sukarno, Indonesia played on the world stage. It was only during the New Order period, because the government wanted to focus on domestic development, that Indonesia simply limited its foreign policy ambition to the region, focusing on ASEAN and not playing such an active role on the global stage. But the moment Indonesia felt that it has already consolidated some of its domestic institutions, the economy is already on the way to recovery, and now that Indonesia is recognized as the world's third largest democracy, we are becoming a normal country. I think that it is only to be expected that, given Indonesia's heritage, inclinations, and also activism in foreign policy in the past, it will again play on the global stage. But that does not mean that ASEAN is not important. Whether, if we don't have ASEAN, we will be creating it. Because the most important thing of why ASEAN was created continues to the present day. Leonard talks about bilateral conflicts, the continuing suspicions, sometimes still the trust deficit even within ASEAN states. We need a forum in which we can talk about our common problems and solve our common problems, even if there are no threats from China or the United States and so on. Within the Southeast Asian region itself, we need a forum within which we can continue to develop close relations. So that raison d'etre remains. Secondly, Indonesia feels that ASEAN is the most important institution and asset that we have to have in order to manage our relations with our much bigger neighbors. So if we have to deal with China, with the United States, with Japan and so on, it is much stronger if we do it within as a unit within ASEAN. So that it's not a coincidence that when Indonesia was the chair of ASEAN in 2011, the theme was ASEAN community and the global community of nations. So going into the global community with a strengthening ASEAN. So I think so that it is not ASEAN or global community. On the other hand, there are concerns within Indonesia, particularly within civil society, academia and so on, who are frustrated with the rather slow evolution of ASEAN, particularly the reluctance of many ASEAN states to open up its political system, because the struggle to put democracy, human rights, the rule of law into the ASEAN Charter was a major struggle. And then when the final charter was really watered down. So probably you will see now that after 5 years, it was agreed that the charter would be reviewed. So this year, the ASEAN Charter could be reviewed, and we'll see to what extent the debates will be. Whether ASEAN, the ASEAN Secretariat will be given greater power, whether the ASEAN Human Rights Commission will be given greater mandate. I think the debates will be there. And if ASEAN continues to be unwilling to move forward in terms of the internal development and openness, there will be groups within Indonesia who will say, oh, forget ASEAN, we'll just move somewhere else.